Hi, this is Betty Traciak from kittystamp.blogspot.com. Besides my paper crafting hobby, I enjoy sewing, and I do find that one influences the other. Today I have some ideas and tips for adding hand stitching to patterned scrapbook paper. I will be recreating the stitched sections of this card. Supplies that you will need for this project are scrapbook paper with a regular geometric pattern. I'm going to be talking in just a moment about the selection of papers that will work best for this project. You will also need a paper piercer and mat. If you have one that has a solid backing, that is good to protect your surface. Also, this is an optional item if you do not have a geometric paper. This is a piercing grid which already has holes that are pierced at a regular interval. If you can see those along here. Other items that you will need will be needles and embroidery floss or a linen thread. I find that if I'm using a linen thread which has a bit more of a texture, these self-threading needles are quite helpful. Two other things that you will need are tape and scissors. When looking for papers to use, look for a regular geometric pattern. You'll be using the pattern on the paper as a guide for piercing the holes for stitching. So something like a gingham is good that has a very regular pattern. Also an Argyle works, and also this mosaic pattern would work as well. You can use multiple points along here for the paper piercing. You can look and see you could use this point and this point, this and this point, this point and this point. I looked through my stash and I found some other examples of things that could be used. This dot would be an excellent one because you could pierce holes either on the dots or in the center to make multiple different types of patterns. This stripe could also work. This could be used in conjunction with the paper piercing mat and put some regular pierced holes down through the center, and you could make a stitching line that goes through the center of each of these. This one's kind of interesting in that it already has a larger dot at very regular intervals. So you could use that dot and you could come up with some interesting patterns, either going across this way, going across here. There are some multiple possibilities with something like this. Now here's an example of something that does not work well. This is a plaid that is an uneven or irregular plaid. You can see that you could, for example, this square here is regular, so you could pierce a hole here and here, but if you were to try to continue that across, it's kind of hard to find places where you have a very regular pattern to be able to add your stitching. Now, if you do not have a regular pattern, you can use something that also has just a nice texture on the background. This in conjunction with the piercing mat could be very nice. I think something like this with a texture at the background adds a bit more interest than piercing just on a solid piece of paper. Here's one that I also thought was interesting. It has small dots in the center so that you could do some piercing along here, and your stitching then could go in between. You could go across and do a little square around each one of these, or different types of things. As you start to look at these, you see that there are lots of different possibilities when you have something that is regular where you could add the stitching. Once you've chosen your paper, take a moment to look at that paper to see where the stitches will look best, and then cut the paper so that that area is centered. So for example, on my project here, I knew that I wanted these stitches to be centered, so when I cut the paper, I did that so that I had a full square here, full square, and a full square, knowing that my stitches would be going in this center area right here. On this section right here, I had decided that I wanted to have 4 stitches going across, and to do that I counted out how many argyles I would need. That would be an uneven number, so I needed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 Argyles, and I cut my piece of paper so that I had those 9 Argyles centered. And here's another example of where I cut this so that the pattern is centered. I could go back then and I could now add stitching down the center. I could add stitching across each of these. There are multiple different ways that I could add the stitching once I have my paper with that pattern centered. Once you're ready to do the piercing, place your paper on your piercing mat and work slowly so that you don't make a mistake, and take a look at where you want to start your stitching. On mine, bring this back in, I want to start the stitching in the center of the darkest square on the upper side, moving to the lower side. So I would start here and I would pierce in the center of the darkest square, up, down, up, down, up, down, and so on, all the way across my piece of paper. So a little bit more about the needles and thread that I used in this case. So I have found that a self-threading needle, which has a small notch at the top for threading, is useful if I'm using something like a linen thread, which has a fibrous outside. So an embroidery floss is a floss thread that is very smooth, and that you can pinch and put directly into the eye of a needle. Because this has a lot of little fibers and furry stuff on the outside, it's a little bit more difficult. So because this has this notch, you can take it, put it in the top, and pull it down through. Now, oh, actually I was able to do it. A lot of times I have to, I thought I might have to do this off camera, because a lot of times I have to get this kind of close because of my eyesight with my glasses to be able to see, and I get that close and pull it through. That time it worked just perfectly. So cut a length of thread and you're ready to start. To begin the stitching, start on the back and come up through the first hole. Leave a length of thread and then go down through the next hole. I like to keep my finger on this. It would be unlikely that you would pull that through, but sometimes I just keep my finger there till I know that that's not going to pull through. And then just stitch all the way across, going up and down alternately. And then when you come to the end, you just repeat going in the opposite direction. Now you will come up in the hole that you went up in before and continue going back across the paper. When you reach the end, go down through the last hole, turn it to the back, and clip thread. Then take a small piece of tape and secure the ends. Once that is secure, you can trim these ends close to the tape. For this section here, I'm going to use the Argyle, and if I look back at this, I can see that I started my piercing on the first full cross over, alternating as I went across. So if I come over here, I'm going to go at the cross lines, those cross, and go right in between each of those, all the way across. And then take the needle and thread again and do something very similar, where I'm just going to go up in the first hole, down in the second, all the way across. And then I'll secure those ends with the tape on either end. And next for this one, I just took a piece of thread, another piece of thread, and wove that back and forth between over and under the stitching. A little bit short. Would have been better if that had been a little bit longer. Can pull that back, can trim that off. And then you can adjust that to have something that looks like that. Off camera, I did go back and complete the mosaic pattern paper to see what that would look like. I put the stitches down through the center, and I really like how that turned out. I think that this will add some very nice texture to another project. I also wanted to show you one that I have also done. This is a little bit more advanced. I just wanted to show you something else that you are able to do with this. So in this one I did the same up and down pattern on the gingham paper, but I did one lazy daisy stitch in each of these going across using a linen thread that had multiple strands together. Once I had those lazy daisies complete, I went back with a single strand of thread and connected those two in between. On these hearts, I just kind of made this up as I went along. I did 3 holes, one up, one down, one up, and one at the bottom. And what I did was I came up here with the thread and down here, leaving a loop, which I pulled over with my thumb, and then I did a little up and down in the top hole to secure each of those hearts at the top. So as you can see, there's oodles and oodles of possibilities to use embroidery stitches on your cards. I now have like lots of ideas and not enough time to do them all, so I really look forward to seeing all of the ideas that you guys come up with. Thanks so much.